All right, so today we are talking about packages. So what I mean by packages is those little things that get installed when you run npm install. The goal here is really to provide some background for what is npm, what is a package manager, what is it like to use packages by other people, kind of in the open source Node.js ecosystem, and then really quick, what is it like to publish your own packages, and understanding some of the realities associated with that, including like security vulnerabilities and then deprecation warnings. Okay, so first of all, what is a package manager? A package manager is generally about like installing random other software that's out there, usually for free by other people. The most common thing you're going to see them used for, though, is installing dependencies in your project. To understand more about NPM and kind of like why NPM is a pretty good package manager, and also like why we care about it so much, why it's so fundamental to Node, you've got to kind of understand a little bit more about the history of how Node evolved. Originally, there's this guy, Ryan Dahl, who made Node.js. It was like, hey, it's like really fast because it's just going to use these native C bindings, and I'm going to use this thing that's already really fast because the people behind Chrome and then some of the people behind Safari were working together on this thing called V8, and we're just going to drop V8 in there. It's going to be really fast, it's going to be like really great, and then also it'll be the language that everybody knows how to write already, and we'll have this JavaScript thing that you can run on the server. So early on, this guy Isaacs built NPM like right there at the beginning, and like NPM kind of became like a fundamental part of Node. Now they've kind of like gone further apart and then closer together over time again and again, but essentially NPM is the way to get stuff for your Node.js app. It's also the way to get all kinds of other stuff now, and that's why when you look at like front-end packages and like front-end tutorials, you'll see Npm Install or whatever. For our purposes here, we're just never going to do that because it makes things more complicated. But also Node was written in such a way by this guy so that it would be incredibly lightweight, so that it will basically do as little as possible out of the box. So without further ado, let's talk about what npm install is actually doing. So I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to generate a package.json file. Okay. But you can see I have this package.json file. It's super basic, nothing in here. This is just vanilla Node. Nothing special about this, okay? So I'm going to run npm install in this folder. And you can see it basically did nothing. It's trying to get me to update npm. It didn't install anything, and it doesn't like that I haven't put a description or a repository field in my package.json file. It also created a lock file, which is probably pretty boring. Let's open it up. Right, it's like super boring. We never look at these lock files, right, as you guys know from before. We'll talk about that in a second. Npm install is tied to the package.json file. It looks at this package.json file, and specifically it looks at the dependencies block, the dependencies key in here, which we don't have one right now, right? So I can add dependencies. We're going to install Lodash, the latest version of Lodash. I'm going to put Lodash on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I'm going to hard code this version, because that's the version I want. I know for sure that that version has no other dependencies. So now when I run npm install, it added one package. Okay, but then let's look in the node modules folder. You can see there's one subfolder inside of there, right? I'm going to open this up in Finder so it's a little bit easier to see. Node modules, Lodash, and then a bunch of files. This is just a bunch of code that's in Lodash. When you install something this way, it's still going to have a package.json file. So you can see it's got a bunch more kind of generated stuff in here with these underscores in front of it. But you can see it's got a lot of the same kinds of things that our package.json file had. It's got like the license and some other information about here's where the code repo is on GitHub, some scripts for testing, etc. If Lodash had dependencies, the truth of the matter is they wouldn't necessarily be in a nested node modules folder anymore. What ends up happening is NPM likes to get clever, and it starts putting those nested dependencies at the top level side by side with Lodash. Npm install installs things into the node modules folder. The node modules folder is where all of the things go once they're npm installed. So thus far we've done npm install just by itself, right? And what that tells npm is like, hey, I want you to look wherever folder I am in right now, which I'm in this folder on my computer. I want you to look and see in this folder if there is a file called package.json. It's going to open it. It's going to look at the dependencies. It's going to look at the name of each dependency, and it's going to install the appropriate version of each dependency. If any of these dependencies have their own dependencies, it's going to install those too at the right versions. And if some of those dependencies all are actually the same, it'll only install them once to try to optimize. Another way I can use npm install is, let's say that instead of installing Lodash at version 4.17.11, I wanted to install Lodash at 4.17.10. So I could do npm install Lodash at 4.17.10, and that's going to tell npm, hey, install this for me, and then stick it in my package.json file. Okay, so I'm going to run npm install Lodash at 4.17.10. I'm going to see what I got in my package.json file, and you can see it put 4.17.10. That's what we would call a loose symvar range or semantic version range. So this is saying npm is going to assume that, like, hey, I'm going to just like get any version that I want that's within a reasonable, close version to that. To get around that, you can type --save--exact. And when you do that, it won't include the caret. So that's what you'll hear that called pinning the version or like pegging the version. That's a strict version number. So that's technically still a symvar range, semantic version range, but it's a semantic version range that consists of exactly one version that it's comfortable with. Only one version will satisfy this range. You can also install other dependencies, like I could install Sails, and that would install the latest version of Sails, and that would lock it to that specific version. All right, so another thing that you're going to run into as you're working with these packages is sometimes you're going to want to be able to be the author of the package, or you're going to be working with a package that you need to change. And what that means is I'll run this command, npm link. So when I run npm link, it's like kind of similar to npm install. It's actually going to run npm install in the background. Npm link has like some weird problems. So like if you're not 100% sure about what you're doing, and also like if you haven't linked a folder in a while, it's useful to wipe the node modules folder and then also get rid of the package lock file. Different versions of npm have worked and not worked with various edge cases, but like that's the safest way to make sure that when you run npm link, it's actually going to work. Now I'm going to run npm link. So what that's going to do is do exactly the same thing as if I ran npm install. Then what it's going to do basically is create a shortcut to this folder globally on my computer only, right? And so that means that over here, I'll be able to run npm link Sails, and that's kind of like running npm install Sails, except that it's using that global link that I created. So because I was inside of a folder over here that had a package.json file, when I ran npm link, it created a global thing on my computer called Sails that then I could install this way. And the reason why I would ever do this is because if I'm working on Sails and I want to like test something, I don't want to have to like publish a new version of Sails to npm for everybody on Earth to use. I might just want to like test it myself. So I could manually go into the node modules folder, right? And I could like tinker with Sails that way. But then I would be editing like a copy, and there's not going to be like version control. Like it won't show up in the GitHub app. But if I do it over here, then I can have the GitHub app open, and I can track my changes in Sails. So maybe I want to change the Sails README. I'll just add some random text at the bottom, right? So now I'm able to just work with it like I normally would. And then if I go over here and I run npm link Sails, then when I look in the node modules folder, see how Sails is pink? If you run lsla node modules, you can see that Sails is a symbolic link pointing to somewhere magical deep inside my computer. This is like a shortcut, right? It's like an alias. That's not a real folder. It's a symbolic link that's associated with this folder over here. This folder. So let's say that I wanted to make it so that every time Sails served a route, it was going to log a little message. I find where we handle routing, and every time we bind an action, I'll log something, all right? Just as an example. It'll say, hi, hi, hi. Okay. So over here, I'm going to make a new Sails app.
Sort of a way to sandbox, sort of emulate having the real package.
Pretty much, yeah. It's you're using an unreleased version of the package that you're working on. You're basically, it's like if you were gonna fork it. If you're gonna fork a package, let's say I needed to fix something in Lodash, and then I wanted to make my fix locally. Well, in order to test it, I need to be able to get it into my project somehow. So that's what npm link is letting me do.
Oh, okay.
Is simulate installing it from npm, but instead of doing that, I'm actually just using my local copy. So when I do Sails lift right now, it's not linked. Okay, so I'm lifting Sails, and this is using the copy that I just installed. But if I run npm link Sails, and then I lift, hi, 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 all over the place. So that's the deal with npm link. And much like npm install, there's like two different commands that look very similar that mean different things. So like if I run npm link, that means, hey, take whatever folder I'm in, look at the package.json file, and this is the thing that I'm exposing as my like shortcut. This is my local copy of whatever package it is that I'm talking about linking. If I'm going to be working on Lodash, I would go inside of Lodash and I would run npm link. If I'm going to be working on Sails, I would go inside of Sails and I would type npm link. See, there's all these other dependencies, but this one's pink. And that's because I ran on this side, I ran npm link Sails. But if I tried to run this before I ran npm link over here, it wouldn't work. You have to run npm link first, then you can run npm link Sails or npm link Lodash, whatever the name is of the thing that you were inside of over here. I had to be in a folder that had a package.json file named the thing, and then I ran npm link, and then I came over to my other place, and I ran npm link Sails. And that doesn't touch the package.json file of this thing, right?
Oh, okay.
This package.json file is just got its normal stuff. It's using Sails 1.2.0 pre-release 2, but that doesn't take into account that like, no, this is some unreleased version. All it does is it creates this symbolic link. And presumably, which is why I mentioned before, like you've got to sometimes just wipe your node modules folder to fix it. Presumably, it figures out the right versions of all these other packages. When you say link it, what does that mean? Because you use link for both sides. I really wish they would have named it something different, like npm link this directory for use anywhere on computer, you know, like, and then this would be like npm link Sails, right? And then it's kind of a little bit clearer. What you're doing really here is like exposing a link. You're doing like a pseudo publish.
Yeah.
It's like fake publish. And then over here, it's sort of like install, but it's like sudo install Sails. But you do that by doing link. And then it stays linked until you change that node modules folder. If you try to do cat party, right, like that's some package probably, like that package is not I haven't linked that on my computer, so it's just going to try to install it.
Okay.
Which is why if you start seeing it like thinking when you type npm link whatever, there's a good chance that you forgot, and so you should just wipe everything and try again, because kind of once that starts happening, especially once you start having to link multiple things. So we talked about npm link, and we talked about npm link some dependency, and we talked about how they're different. They're like two completely different things, right?
Yeah.
But they both are called link. All right, and we talked about how to tell whether it's linked. It's going to be pink, and that's how I usually tell. And that's because in my bash profile, I have like this thing that turns on colors. Even if it's not pink, it'll still have this little arrow, as long as you do it with ls-la. And then we also talked about some common problems. One is if you notice that when you run npm link Sails or whatever, it gets really slow. That means it didn't work right. It means it didn't actually link to some pre-existing thing. And then also sometimes node modules can get randomly messed up or deleted. The thing to remember is that, hey, if I'm seeing problems and I don't understand why, I just do rimwrap node modules and get rid of the package lock file on both sides. Okay. That, and then just reinstall. And then just run npm install on both sides after you do that. And that way you're just like, you're getting a clean slate, all right? You're not gonna have to worry about anything else. All right, so now let's talk about Npm Publish. So Npm Publish is kind of like Npm Link, except that it actually goes live. Let's actually do a real package. So right now we're looking at the Sails repo. And when I look at the package.json file in Sails, you can see that it has a dependency called Sails generate. Our app over here has a dependency on Sails. It does not have a dependency on Sails generate directly. We look at this list and Sails generate is not in the list. So because of that, we know that, all right, if we want to make a change to Sails generate and we want to test that out in this application, we have to do not just one link, but 2 links. We have to link over here, we have to link npm link Sails, and then we have to run npm link Sails generate, because that's the name of the package that we want to work on. So I'm going to open up Sails generate, which I already have cloned on my system. And you can see I have untagged changes, but these are changes that I'm okay with putting live, right, in a new release. And what I'm going to do to publish it is I'm going to run a command called npm version first. The thing to realize is that when you run npm publish, it looks at the name of your package in the package.json in the folder you're in, and it looks at the version of that package, and it's going to try to publish Sails generate at version 1.16.4. So that's not what I want, because that version already exists. I'm going to run npm version patch, and that's going to basically take me up to 1.16.5. And it updates that for me. It also creates a git tag for me, and it creates a commit. And this is nice because it makes it so that you have a really consistent kind of way to track when you do releases. So I'm going to go ahead and push that. And so I have this little shortcut, which stands for Git Push and Git Push tags. For using the GitHub app, when you do push, it's just pushing the code. It's just pushing the commits. It doesn't push the tags. If you want to push the tags, you have to do that on the command line. And really the only time that matters most of the time is when you want to publish, or when you want to like push up a tag that was created by running npm version. We just created a new one, 1.16.5. I'm going to run Git Push. And whenever you see this, it's because I don't have my computer set up to be able to push from the command line without signing into GitHub. If it has an HTTPS remote, so this is kind of a aside, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to git@github.com:, and then I can push. So it's all pushed up, it's ready to go. It's still not on npm, and I know that because just go to npmjs.com/package/ the name of the package. And I can see, look, it's still, the latest version is 1.16.4. But I'm ready to publish 1.16.5. So I'm going to run npm publish. It says that it worked. Anyways, we can see the latest is now 1.16.5, so we're all good, it's published. So now if I was to run npm install and I had a compatible semantic version range in my package.json file, it's going to pick up this new version. I'm going to do npm link Sails generate, and I haven't actually run npm link over here yet, so I will. And when it's done, I'll run npm link Sails generate. Okay, so now I'm inside of Sails, and I can look at Sails node modules folder, and it has Sails generate, it's pink. And then I go over here, and I look at, I don't have to relink it, it's still linked up. It's pointed at Sails. So my app is pointed at Sails. Sails is pointed at Sails generate, and now I can change things inside of Sails generate, and it'll work. Now, realistically, so something else that npm link does, besides the thing that we just talked about, where it actually like links it up for use in this node modules folder, is that it also takes whatever package this is, and if the package that we're talking about has a command line tool component, which Sails does, it means that anytime I run Sails on my computer, it's actually going to use this local version of Sails instead of the installed version. So right now when I run Sails v, it says that, but let's say that I wanted to change that behavior and make it so that every time it runs, it says hello. So now when I type Sails v, it says hello. And that's because I ran npm link in the Sails folder. And because Sails is not just your everyday package, it also is a command line tool. So there's 3 kinds of npm packages. There's a basic library, which is most npm packages. And that's things like, Sails serves this purpose. Like any npm package is always this, pretty much, right? And that means that you use it in your code. Command line tool. If you guys have used my weird kit package,
Oh yeah.
Npm Install micro kit, all that is a command line tool. And so that's why whenever you install Sails the very first time, you know how you have to do -g? That's because that means install it as a command line tool. So when I install this, what that's going to let me do is run kit on the command line, which is a command line tool. And it exposes what's called an executable, meaning that I can execute it, I can run it. I can type kit and it runs. I can type Sails and it runs. Another executable you might be familiar with is ls or cd. All right. There's also a third kind of npm package that you'll see out there, which is just the bucket of crap npm package, because you can actually put whatever you want on npm and just have it contain miscellaneous files, right? So we actually use that approach for stuff like parasails, because all it is a file that gets dumped into your assets folder. And so it's really just a bucket of crap. Now it's also a library. If we look at the code, there's this dist folder and there's just like stuff sitting in here. But there's also this index.js file that exposes it for use in like your tests. But really the thing to realize is that there's also this third use case that, just to be inclusive, that you'll see npm packages used for, and that's just to hold files. And then there's also something called a module. And understanding the difference between these two things is difficult because so many people just use the words interchangeably. NPM stands for Node Package Manager, but you'll hear them called node modules, and in fact the folder is called node modules, which is confusing because really it should be called npm packages that have been installed in this directory. Modules are files or Node.js files, basically. This app.js thing, that's a module. What makes something a module is that it has module.exports. So when you install a package, you're installing a npm package that might contain one or more modules, right? If you were to look at Sails generate, it's full of stuff, right? It's got index.js. This is a module. It says module.exports equals help generate module.exports equals generate target. Each of these files is a node module. Package is the whole thing. This whole folder ends up being a package because it's distributable. I can install it and then I get the whole thing at once. Modules don't have versions. If someone says install a module from npm, they're really just trying to say install a package from npm. All right, so over here, let's look at this. This is a package JSON of a generated Sails project. You can see there are a handful of dependencies. There's Sails, Sails Hook API Analytics, Sails Hook Organics, Sails Hook ORM, Sails Hook Sockets. This thing called Connect Redis, which is for running the session. Socket.io Redis, this is for managing real-time connections for chat in your application. And then Lodash, this is for convenience, basically, and you can switch this out to any version of Lodash that you like. There's also dev dependencies, and these get installed as well, but they only get installed when npm is not running in production mode. So if you're deployed on a Heroku server, these do not get installed. So these dependencies never actually get run on the remote computer where your app is deployed. And that's, stuff like ESLint. If you're going to do Sails run lint because you want to check your code quality, you don't need that to exist on the server. You don't have to wait for that every time you deploy. This is a loose semantic version range. All of these things are loose semantic version ranges, and the way that we do this in the kind of Sails ecosystem is anywhere where it's a package maintained by the Sails core team, we use a semantic version range that's loose. But if it's a package that comes from anywhere else, even if we like the person that made it, we always lock it down, because we don't want to inadvertently have stuff break out from under us. And if it does, we want it to be our own fault. In applications that you're writing in your code, if you don't have access to the Sails core team, you might consider locking this down yourself, right? It depends basically how much do you trust that person? How much do you trust them to follow semantic versioning and not break your app? You want to be conservative and you want to avoid just inheriting random updates from people. Okay, so we've talked about loose versus strict. That would make it strict. And then we've talked about dependencies. We've talked about dev dependencies. We've talked about the name, and we've talked about the version. Now this is the actual Sails app itself, so the name and the version don't really matter much because we're not going to run Npm Publish here. We're not going to put this app out there on Npm. And in fact, that's what this is for, is just in case we did, that prevents it from actually getting published. There's nothing stopping you from publishing an app. All you have to do is delete private true, and then you can run npm publish. But here it makes sense because we're saying this is the range of versions that we'd be comfortable installing. Last but not least, I'm going to show you how to run npm ls. What npm ls does is it crawls your node modules folder, and it tells you, okay, what are all of the dependencies that are installed, and then what are their dependencies. And you can see this really complicated tree is just like all of the stuff we have installed, and deduped means it didn't install that particular version because it only installed it once. Like something else was using this at that same version, so it didn't have to reinstall it. So this can be useful when you're trying to figure out like what is going on, basically, or like where am I getting this weird deprecation warning from. So now to talk about libraries really quick. We talked a little bit about module.exports before, or we alluded to it. Module.exports is the way that you tell in your Node application or your Node package what you're going to expose to the world. So just taking Sails.generate, for example, there's a file in here called inventDescription.js. And this is a file that has module.exports equals, and then it's all just a function. There we go. This is what this file is exposing. This is what this module exposes. So if I was to go into, I'm going to go into the node REPL, and I'm going to do require lib invent description.js. I got that function. I loaded this. And I could actually do like var invent description equals, and then I could look at it, and I could even run it if I wanted to. And it doesn't work because I didn't pass in the stuff that I needed to pass in. So this is a function that invents a good description for something with that name. So like mow the lawn, it's not going to try to describe that. It's too complicated. But if it's named mow, it's going to say mow something. So module.exports lets you expose something for other code to require it. So it's a way to import code, basically. And that's how you can import dependencies, too. So here I loaded a file, like a specific file. But this, I could have also loaded Lodash. Okay, when you're on the REPL, you shouldn't use underscore. Now when I run Lodash, that's Lodash and all the functions. So if you don't specify, if you don't start off with a dot, you're going to be loading from the node modules folder. But if you start with a dot, you're just loading from a different file in the repo. Deeply nested dependencies. So right now we're talking about, we have a Sails app over here. We have Sails itself right here, and then we have Sails.generate. So over here in the Sails app, I could do require Sails, and I get Sails. And we have a fun little graphic when you require Sails. Over here, I'm inside of Sails. I could do require Sails.generate, and it loads Sails.generate. Now technically, I can, over here in my Sails app, I could require Sails.generate too, but I shouldn't. And the reason why I shouldn't is because if I look at the package JSON file, oops, that's the package lock. Sails.generate is not listed here. So what version am I getting? Who knows? It's completely random. You have no control over it. It's sort of vaguely terrifying that it even lets you do it, right? So just don't ever require something in your code unless that dependency is actually one of your dependencies. Just because it happens to be the dependency of one of your dependencies, first of all, you might not even have control over that, and it could randomly change out from under you. But more importantly, it's just like, what version would you even be getting of Sails.generate? Like, it'll work, but I should never rely on that. It grabs whichever one happens to be floating around in the top level. Remember how we talked about in NPM 2?
Yeah.
If I was doing ls node modules in NPM 2, I would see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I would see 13 folders. But NPM 3 and beyond, I see a bajillion folders. And now, unfortunately, I can do this, but I shouldn't. I mustn't. Right? That's why I'm bringing it up. Never ever do this. You can now because of what happened in NPM 3, but it's really sort of dark and twisted and something you should avoid. Only install your children, don't install your grandchildren. All right, now last but not least, there are these messages that have been popping up, right? Every time we've installed stuff. And I'm gonna, because I have stuff linked, I'm about to run npm install, and out of habit, I'm gonna just remove the package log file and the node modules folder before I run npm install. You know, in the future, you might be watching this video and be like, hey, it's fine when I do this, and that's great, awesome, I'm glad they fixed it. But right now, as of npm 6.5, at least, it's not, doesn't always work. So anyways, I deleted the node modules folder, I deleted the package log file, and now I'm gonna run npm install. So first of all, you'll notice these things. npm warn deprecated. Mail composer at 2.1.0, this project is unmaintained. So they went into their code and they ran npm deprecate, which is a command you can run just like npm publish, and you can just put whatever message you want here. Whenever you see those, that's all that is. Someone ran npm deprecate and was like, I don't want to deal with it anymore. We could actually try to figure it out, right? So npm package mail composer. And I have no idea, right? This is a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. You can see there's this message up here that says this project is unmaintained. It was last published 2 years ago. And whoever this person is, right, didn't want to have to get bothered with issues and pull requests anymore, right, about this project. Now for us, we don't care because we actually lock our stuff down anyways. So I don't care if it's unmaintained. Frankly, the less you change it, the better, because that means I don't have to deal with it changing, right? So that's fine, we can ignore it. Unfortunately, there's no way to turn off these messages, which is why you still see them. And because it doesn't actually impact any aspect of using the Sails framework or any of our packages, it just hasn't been important at all. So that's why we haven't dealt with it. Similarly, you can read them all. Coffeescript on npm is now under a different package name. We want people to install this package instead, but we didn't. We installed this package and it works fine. Build mail, the project is unmaintained. Fine. Sprintf, the Sprintf package is deprecated in favor of Sprintf-js. Fine, but we're just going to stick with this one because we don't care, because we're locked to a specific version anyways. And if there are ever any problems or vulnerabilities or issues with that particular version, we're going to deal with them as part of maintaining our package, Sails. All right, same thing for the rest of these. So that's how deprecation messages work, and that's where they come from. Another thing you'll see when you're installing is stuff that looks like this, and sometimes it'll look like even more different, right? You'll notice if you ever installed the Sails SQL adapter, there's actually more stuff that gets dumped out by Oracle. All of it is just, it can be messages sometimes that are built into the install scripts of the packages we're installing, or in this case, this is a WebSocket related package, and it actually installs native code. Like it's compiling C code into assembly language. And in order to do that, it's like running some other tools. And that's all happening behind the scenes, and it's kind of harmless, it's just a little noisy. Okay, and then last but not least, you'll see this. And right now you can see it says there's 76 vulnerabilities, 66 low, 4 moderate, 4 high, and 2 critical. Now, if you've installed any npm package ever, you've seen these probably. Well, the way that we manage this in Sails is when there's a new vulnerability, we look at it, we determine whether it is a vulnerability that is actually affecting a code path used by Sails or any of its dependencies or its dependencies, or its dependencies. And then we see if it matters to us, right? Let's see, for example, like there's a vulnerability, or there was for a while, in one of the tools for content negotiation of requests that Express uses, and therefore it impacted us as well. We determined that it didn't actually affect the code path that we're using in Sails or any of the methods that we expose for you to use in your application. And so we left it there because it doesn't actually matter and it's not a priority. All of the vulnerabilities that are there now are in that status, or there are new ones that we haven't looked at yet. And the way that we approach that is about once a month, we go on our own and we start checking to see if we can find any new security vulnerabilities that are a problem and directly affect us. But we also mostly rely on people from the community to point out key vulnerabilities that they think actually impact our code. The way that this works is there's a vulnerability database, and if you detect a vulnerability in any of our dependencies or their dependencies, that gets published and it just kind of bubbles up to everybody, whether or not you use that code, right? So like imagine if Sails generate is obviously part of the Sails ecosystem, but imagine if Sails didn't actually use this file, invent description. But let's say that somebody found a security vulnerability in this file. We're going to see that show up over here as one of these. Even though we're not using that file, it's still going to be listed. Another thing that affects this list here is even if we are using this file, we might not be using this in production, right? So for example, Sails generate only gets used during development, right? It only gets used when you generate a new Sails project. So I don't really care if there's a potential denial of service vulnerability with one of the dependencies of Sails generate, because I'm not actually using it in production. No one's going to be able to deny service by sending clever requests, because this code is never being used to handle requests. This code is being just used when I run Sails new. So it's fine. Similarly, a lot of our grunt dependencies have security vulnerabilities, but like as you can see, the grunt dependencies aren't even they don't even get installed on the server in production. But still, those vulnerabilities bubble up and count towards this total. So keeping this number low is a constant battle that you're going to have if you have any package that has a number of dependencies. And in the Sails project, we do our best to try to like chop it down when we can. It's just that compared to other stuff like fixing obviously any real vulnerability first, or adding new features, or improving stability and reliability and like the performance, and more importantly than anything else, just the usability of the framework that's there, making sure that it does what it's supposed to do. That's like our priority above making this number go down. All right, well, so we covered npm deprecate and the deprecation warning you see when you run npm install. We've talked about vulnerability detection and the vulnerability databases. There's also other tools besides npm like snipe, right? And so this one had a medium severity redos thing, right? And then as of 17.11 they fixed it. So you can there's also nodesecurity.io you can look at. That's when you hear about tools to detect vulnerabilities. npm is just one. There's plenty of others. We talked about how there's 3 kinds of npm packages: libraries, command line tools, and just buckets of files. We talked about symvar ranges and the versions numbers themselves. We talked about the basics of the difference between modules and packages, and how a module is just a file that has a module.exports. It's basically a module is something you can require. We talked about why you shouldn't npm install, or why you shouldn't require grandchild dependencies. You should only require direct child dependencies. And we've talked a little bit about how to use npm link and develop on a project locally without having to publish it every time you want to test a new change that you made. Finally, we went over what is a package manager, what's the deal with Node.js and NPM, where did this all come from, and why does it matter? And then we talked a little bit about how npm install works now and how it used to work prior to the version 3 change that kind of changed a lot of the implementation details. So that's it for packages. I hope this was useful. Next time, we're going to be talking more about JavaScript itself.